अभय चरणारविंद भक्ति वेदांत गोस्वामी महाराज श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय।
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 ओम ज्ञानतिमिरन्दस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। श्रीचैतन्य मनोभीष्टं स्थापितं येन भूतले स्वयं रूप कदा मह्यं ददाति स्वपदान्तिकम्। वन्देऽहं श्रीगुरो श्रीयुतापदकमलं श्रीगुरुं वैष्णवांश्च श्रीरूपं साग्रजातं सहगना रघुनाथान्वितं तं सजीवं साद्वैतं सावधूतं परिजनसहितं कृष्ण
Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Param Sagana Lalita Shri Vishakhamritamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya eva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasari Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna. So happy and honored to be back here after a long time. It's nice to be in this temple room. It brings back a lot of memories. So today's topic, I was given the topic, importance of being satisfied in Krishna conscious life. And I'll try and make this as practical as possible. And the hope is that we have more time for Q&A because then we can actually discuss things rather than it being a one-way monologue. Is that all right? Okay. Good. I also would like to seek blessings and forgiveness. I'm not wearing a dhoti. And I feel highly disqualified to be sitting on the Vyasasana without a dhoti. But I have a back problem, and when I tie a dhoti, it restricts blood circulation, so it makes it harder for me to sit and concentrate. So I hope it's all right with you. It's all right with you too. Okay. So, importance of being satisfied in Krishna conscious life. How many of us know what satisfaction feels like?
Peace.
Peace, okay. No, how many of us know and feel or can explain what satisfaction feels like?
After eating prasadam.
After you eat prasadam, okay, that's a good description. That's a good description. After you eat prasadam, that's a good one. What else? After a nice kirtan, okay. What else? Any other thoughts?
After hard work.
After hard work, okay. When you lie down at night, okay, good. I can sleep now. Yes, Managopal.
Yes, the feeling that you don't need anything else.
The feeling that you don't need anything else. Okay, very good. Okay, I'm going to flip it around. How many of us know what dissatisfaction feels like?
I'm still not there.
Meaning not satisfaction or dissatisfaction?
I'm not still there, like not satisfied.
Not satisfied, yeah, but we all know, yes, you were going to say what dissatisfaction feels
So
like.
you asked how many of you know
Yeah.
what dissatisfaction is.
Yeah.
I'm raising my hand. I know what is dissatisfaction.
Okay. So can you give me a description, like when it feels, you know?
How it feels to be
Yeah,
dissatisfied.
dissatisfied, yeah.
It feels empty. It feels like
Okay.
you've not done what you wanted to do.
Yeah.
Or what it should be done.
Yeah, I know when you take the gulab jamun and it's hard and
You work so hard.
you can actually throw it on somebody and hurt them.
It's bad.
You know, that's an experience of dissatisfaction. What else? Yes.
Anxiety.
Anxiety. Okay.
Not fulfilling expectations.
Not fulfilling expectations. Okay. Good. What else? When you want more, that's a very common feeling. You want more. Yes. What else? Anything else?
There is
I'm feeling dissatisfied right now. Okay. There is a very palpable experience of dissatisfaction that we know what it is. It somehow seems like dissatisfaction has a longer shelf life. It lives. I mean, when we think about moments that we were satisfied, they were basically flashes in time. But somehow dissatisfaction seems to have this undercurrent, it stays. Right? And even when it's satisfied, it's like a bubble that just bursts, and then again we go back to our familiar feeling of dissatisfaction. Right? It's like noise in the system. It lives forever. So the reason why I wanted to think about examples of satisfaction and dissatisfaction is because this topic is a very big topic. And one of the ways I wanted to make it practical is when we recollect experiences of what satisfaction feels like and dissatisfaction feels like. Because I remember very clearly the reason why I came to spiritual life. Ramchandra was saying I went to IIT. And one of the reasons why I went to IIT is because I had hopes that I would be satisfied. I was top of my class before I went to IIT. And I felt like life would be the same way. I would always be the top of my class. But when I went to IIT, and some of you who are not familiar with the institute, 300,000 applicants, they accept, at least at that time, they were accepting only 2,500. And when I went to the school, I realized that I was the bottom percentile of the students. And try as hard as I could, or I would, I realized that I would never be able to actually even break into the top 1,000. Because some people are just born with brilliance. And it was a big existential crisis for me. I was, for people who have always are addicted to always being successful, inferiority complex comes very easily. And I felt deeply inferior. It was painful, actually. As an 18-year-old, I didn't even know how to explain or articulate it. That made me feel even more alone. And it was a hard experience. And it was that palpable experience of dissatisfaction that led me to ask questions about, well, what is life? And will this feeling of dissatisfaction continue to live forever? My mother told me that if I finish my education, get a job, and get married, everything will be fine. She did. There was with all good intentions. They say the road to hell was paved with good intentions. So with all good intentions, she actually said that. I don't know why you're laughing, but it was not a satisfying answer. It was hard, and that was what led me to ask questions. And somehow, by Krishna's grace, I came in touch with the devotees. I came in touch with the Bhagavad Gita, and there was a verse from the Bhagavad Gita that actually really struck me when I read, because I could identify myself very clearly. Krishna says there are 4 kinds of people who come to devotional life. What's the first kind? What does artha mean? Distress. We all know what that feeling is. And somehow material life defeats us in such, unforeseen ways that somehow we run to spiritual life for shelter. We just take it. I was very similar. I came to spiritual life because I wanted freedom from material suffering. I wanted freedom from this perpetual feeling of dissatisfaction, and a feeling that there was no hope. And that's what brought me to spiritual life. That's what brought me to deeper inquiry. Now, if you read that verse in the Gita, there are 4 kinds of people. Krishna says, first one is distress. Second one, what does artha mean? For wealth, or you broaden the scope of wealth. It's any kind of material desire, actually. Right. Third kind? Inquisitive, curiosity. Fourth kind? Personal knowledge. Right. Now, what's interesting with each one of them is you will see there is a progressive level of dissatisfaction. It just changes its form. So when we speak about the importance of satisfaction or being satisfied in Krishna consciousness, it's very important to understand that Krishna consciousness begins because of dissatisfaction. So we have to be grateful to dissatisfaction first. The material world has been constructed specifically in a way to bring us to spiritual life. Right? So dissatisfaction has a purpose. Right? So we come to spiritual life, we are dissatisfied. So moving very quickly to, hopefully you can relate to this experience. I came to spiritual life. It was exciting. I remember the first lecture and the first Khichdi Prasad with Sukari. I had it. The lecture was amazing. It was given by Adishan Prabhu, who some of you may know personally, others may have heard about him. It was one of the most intellectually and emotionally satisfying experience I had. I remember walking back to my dorm room, just feeling like, this is just, I think I found it. This is incredible. It's just so fully satisfying. And what once seemed hopeless started getting hopeful. And then I came to Krishna consciousness and something happened after that. I became dissatisfied again. And that feeling of dissatisfaction has continued to stay and just changed shapes and forms in many ways. So somehow we came to Krishna consciousness because of dissatisfaction. And suddenly, after many years of practice of spiritual life, we still find ourselves dissatisfied. Why? Why is that? Any thoughts? Not practicing properly, okay? We're not fully surrendered to Krishna, that's a good one. Devotee offenses, okay, good, right? You see that person leaving socks in the room and you become like, this person's leaving socks in the room. Yeah, sure. When we first come to spiritual life, all devotees are glorious, they're great. We worship them and then we become familiar with them. And everything goes downhill from that place. What else?
Still have material desires.
That's the interesting thing. We still have material desires. Right? Now the thing is, when we come to spiritual life, that doesn't mean, and this is very important, we know this, but we don't necessarily acknowledge it. We still have material desires. Right? So the flavor of material dissatisfaction in our spiritual life is still present. And it takes many different, we can taste the different flavors of dissatisfaction. So there is this hard-held and justified belief, and I'm saying this with my own personal experience, there is this hard-held and justified belief that spiritual advancement depends on my material security.
True.
What is true? Is that belief true, or the fact that we have that belief is true?
The misconception.
The misconception, right? It's so tricky. We find ourselves leaning on our material lives and material security because we think that our spiritual advancement is dependent on material security. Is that true or false?
False.
Completely false?
It's relatively true.
Okay, it's relatively true. That's a Achintya Veda answer. Yeah, I can't question you on that, right? So it's relatively true. There's some truth to it, right? But it's so hard held, and it's so we almost take it for granted that unless I get to a certain place materially, I will not be spiritually satisfied. Now, what's interesting is those two things have nothing to do with each other. Absolutely nothing to do with each other. But when we are in the practicing stage of spiritual life, and this is why this topic is important to understand, at least I'm presenting one perspective on it, there are many perspectives that we can take. Why this becomes an important discussion, satisfaction in Krishna consciousness, is because we are still carrying our material insecurities into our spiritual life. Right? Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. We usually think that, oh, I have material desires and therefore I'm bad. Right? What is the 10th offense against the holy name? Anyway?
To maintain material
Okay. To maintain material desires, even after understanding some of the instructions in this matter. Now, does it say to have material desires? What's the difference between having material desires and maintaining material desires?
Feeding them is maintained.
Okay, feeding the material desires. That's very interesting. So we have material desires, and we can't just one day hit the delete button. It just goes away. In fact, it can happen, but Krishna has to hit the delete button. Right? Do you know sometimes when we have to delete a bunch of files, you know what we do? We select 1, 2, 3, shift, select, and like all of them get selected. But in the selection process, those still exist. But then finally you hit the delete button, it all gets deleted. That final delete button is Krishna's. Right? Now, what's important, what we can do from our side, and this is hopefully the focus of the topic today, is we can actually spend time selecting. That's where our work is. So, when we talk about material desires, material insecurities disturb our minds and interfere with our spiritual practice. How many of us experience this on a daily basis? I do. So many of them. Right? There are material insecurities, we experience them. And they have a direct interference. They sit down to chant japa. It just becomes, somehow japa becomes the place where I start problem solving. And the mind just goes there. I'm just trying to fix certain things, or I find myself many times complaining about people in my mind. And there is a direct interference. And we can take any and all problems that we have in our spiritual life. And somehow during japa time, they enter the mind. Right? So we definitely know what it feels like when material desires and insecurities interfere with our spiritual practices. Right? Now, when they interfere with our spiritual practices, they also impede our spiritual advancement. So, going back to the point, what Madan Gopal Prabhu said, relatively true. Yes, there is a place for us to satisfy our material desires because they interfere with our spiritual practice. Right? And that's why we say we need an ashram. What does anyone know what the definition of an ashram is?
Shelter.
Shelter from? Yeah, exactly. And now when we talk about an ashram, the function of an ashram is it provides a right environment where certain material desires can be met with so that spiritual advancement can happen. That's the purpose of an ashram. The problem with our material desires and us making spiritual advancement is when there are so many material desires that are constantly interfering and we are not satisfying them properly, they just directly interfere with our spiritual practice. So it's important for us to, we all know what hangry feels like. You know what hangry is?
Hungry and angry.
Yeah, I usually am on the receiving end of hangry. When my wife gets angry, I get it too. So I know what hangry feels like. I've also been on the other side where I have been hungry and not known how to express it, and she gets it too. So that's just an example. But we all have certain material desires, and they interfere with our spiritual practice. They have to be met with in a proper way. Now, what happens though? Choice of an ashram, this is important. It provides an environment where there is enough comfort and enough challenge to advance in our spiritual life. Where does the advancement come from? Does it come from the comfort? Where does it come from? It comes from the challenge. Believe me, our spiritual advancement doesn't come with our comfort. It comes from our spiritual challenge. The comforts are necessary so that we can meet our challenges properly. So the function of an ashram is to provide just enough comfort. And in fact, I like to say the challenges in an ashram have to be more than the comfort. Because it's in the space of the challenge, that's where we actually make spiritual advancement. But if it's too challenging, we can't. If it's too comfortable, we can't. We have to be in that zone of enough comfort and enough challenge. Okay? So, any ashram is not about convenience, it's about necessity. I need certain things. I need certain things for my spiritual advancement. I'll take them so that I can meet my challenges in a proper way. Does this make sense? Okay, any questions up until this point?
So,
Yes.
in other words, you're saying that welcome challenges because they are the path which is advanced.
Yes, welcome challenges, but at the same time, when we talk about material desires, it's important to fulfill them. So I'm not saying there's dissatisfaction that's caused by material desires, right? So it's important to fulfill them, but and I'll elaborate on that a little more as we move towards the later part of this talk. That it's important to take out the illusion that my spiritual advancement actually depends on my satisfying material desires. Okay. The only reason why I satisfy my material desires is so that they don't interfere. That's it. But they are not, my spiritual advancement is actually dependent on how I deal with my challenges, including my material desires, head on. So, is that clear? Okay. So, this is the challenge of an ashram. Any ashram, I'm not talking about any particular ashram. Sorry. Even when we choose our circumstances, when we choose our ashrams, we actually become preoccupied with the comforts than meeting the challenges. So by that, what I mean is, we take our material desires. We choose an ashram. We say that, you know what, this is the best place for me to really make spiritual advancement. As soon as we step into it, the tendency is actually to go towards fulfilling certain material things and become preoccupied with that, rather than meeting our challenges head on and seeing what do we need to make spiritual advancement. Somehow that focus on our spiritual advancement actually gets lost. Again, I'm speaking from my own personal experience. Right. So when our focus from our spiritual advancement gets moved, gets taken away, even when we seem like we are practicing spiritual life, the dissatisfaction that once led us to start with spiritual life, to seek out spiritual life, comes back again, and we feel it. Even as we are practicing our spiritual lives, we feel the dissatisfaction because our focus is not our spiritual advancement. It becomes something else. Question?
So this model, right, like the comfort versus challenge model, right? The challenge with this model is that when you face a challenge situation, you instead of going to Krishna for comfort, you're going to your comfort for comfort, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then it becomes like, then you work hard to increase that comfort level,
Right.
to overcome the challenge, right?
Right.
So this is cycle, it becomes like a vicious cycle, right?
Right.
So you instead of going to Krishna, you're just trying to internally channelize that whole thing, right?
Right.
So is this model then workable from this perspective? It seems like having the comfort level will actually just make it even worse for you because you just go in the cycle, right?
Okay, no, it's a very good question. I'm going to give you 5 steps at the end. you can actually work through it. So please be with me. But it's a very good question. Okay. So when our focus from our spiritual life and our spiritual advancement actually slips, that's the time when we'll actually experience dissatisfaction. Sometimes we wonder why this dissatisfaction. I'm chanting my 16 rounds. I'm following regular, I'm going to the temple, I'm doing seva, but still the dissatisfaction exists. I start comparing myself with other people in the temple. Oh, why is that person getting all the praise and appreciation? I'm not getting it. Why is that person getting to do all the important services? I'm not getting it. And the dissatisfaction just stays. Right? So, here's where the real challenge is. I'm going to very quickly go through this and open up for questions. Here's where the real challenge is. Can I own my material dissatisfaction rather than fulfilling it? And by this, what I mean is when we are dissatisfied, how many of us actually look inside and say, where is this dissatisfaction coming from? Can we take full ownership of it and say, it is my material desire? And not justify it in any other way. Because in spiritual life, you know what? We actually can justify all our material desires as, oh Prabhu, I'm trying to serve Krishna here. It's so convenient and so easy to put that spin. But even when we do that, the problem is the dissatisfaction doesn't go away. And the reason why it doesn't go away is because what we did when we actually convert our material desires into a spin for devotional service is that we did not take ownership of the fact that I have this material desire. And because of that lack of honesty, you know what happens? Krishna doesn't take away the material desire. Right? So the first step, and this is so critical, so important, the first step when we see that we are dissatisfied is to look at the cause of the dissatisfaction. And we see this in the Bhagavatam. Right? How does the Srimad Bhagavatam get written? What was the dissatisfaction? Right? Vyasadeva, a literary incarnation of Krishna, after having composed everything, all of these spiritual literatures, what happened to him? Felt dissatisfied. Right? And he didn't just say, maybe the source of this dissatisfaction, maybe I didn't get enough authorship, the New York Times has still not made this the bestseller. No, he looked at the cause of his dissatisfaction. And he owned it. I have not glorified Krishna directly. My problem. Right? So when we experience dissatisfaction in a devotional life, that's because there are material desires that are still plaguing us, and we are not taking full ownership of it. We have to own it, not spin it into something else. That's the first step. Right? So when we can own it, when we see our material desire, then we have a choice. And the choice is what? There are only two ways in which we can go. What are the two ways in which we can go?
Accept or reject.
Accept or reject. Okay, the one thing is we accept. Okay, it's my material desire. After that, what do? You try to fulfill it, or you don't try to fulfill it. Right? And again, we have a choice. We can try to fulfill it, or we don't try to fulfill it. What should our first choice be? Not to try and fulfill it. Right? Not to try and fulfill it. Because when we try not to fulfill it, there is a way in which we acknowledge it is a material desire. I'm not going to invest in it anymore. It is a deliberate decision. And Krishna in the Gita, in the 17th chapter of the Gita, he says the first thing he talks about talks about austerities in the mode of goodness, passion, and ignorance. And Krishna says austerity in the mode of goodness. The first thing he lists there is what? Does anybody know? He says satisfaction is the first thing to practice when it comes to austerity of mind. And he calls it austerity for a reason. And that austerity of mind is, I see my material desire and I say, I'm not going to fulfill it. Right? The second thing that we can do is go to Krishna and ask for strength to overcome it. Right? That's what it means by owning a material desire. First thing we say, I'm not going to fulfill it. Second, I go to Krishna for strength to overcome it. And the third thing is, even after that, when this satisfaction doesn't go away, when it starts to really plague us, then what do we do?
Minimally satisfied.
Okay, good. Minimally satisfied. Right? But we don't minimally satisfy it by saying, oh Prabhu, this is devotional service. Right? And this is what again the Bhagavatam demonstrates this incredibly well. Kartam Muni in the third canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. It's one of the most incredible things. He wants to get married. What does he do?
Pray to Lord Vishnu.
He prays to Lord Vishnu. And when he prays to Lord Vishnu, how does he express himself?
He said, I'm sorry, but this is where I am.
Yeah, you see the mood, you see the honesty there. Like he stands in front of Vishnu and says, I'm really sorry. But this, I have this desire. And it needs fulfillment. You know what's Vishnu's response to that? Vishnu starts crying and seeing honesty of Karuna. Right? Again, it's owning the material desire. That's what it is. It's mine, and I don't like it. I feel ashamed of it. But Krishna, I don't have any other way because it's so disturbing to my spiritual advancement that I need to meet it in some way. So please, minimally satisfy it. Right? So that's the when we do that, what does it do? It actually creates humility. Right? Again, the purpose of material dissatisfaction is to bring us to spiritual life. So when we learn how to own it, when we learn how to accept it, and when we learn how to confess, the only result of that material dissatisfaction is what?
Spiritual progress.
Yes. It's spiritual progress. And this is how we can convert any material dissatisfaction. This is how we can convert any material dissatisfaction into spiritual dissatisfaction. And when that happens, when we can actually come to Krishna and honestly pray so that it minimally be satisfied, and over time, honestly try and be less and less and less dependent on it. It's incredible. Through that practice, when we are sincere, Krishna becomes satisfied. And you know what happens when Krishna becomes satisfied? He removes our material desires. But this is the thing, Prabhupada says this so often, right? When you water the root of the tree, what happens?
Every leaf.
When Krishna, and this is the sign of, this is the only way we can actually truly become satisfied, is Shri Gaur Nitai ki jai, Sitaram Lakshman Hanuman ki jai, Gopal ki jai. And this is the only way we can actually truly become satisfied, is when Krishna is satisfied. And I can tell you with the few experiences that I've had in my own life, when Krishna is pleased. It happens in many ways. The devotees are pleased, or the spiritual master is pleased. And when I say pleased, it doesn't mean a pat on the head and say, good job. No, pleased. And that kind of pleasing is pleasing with the way you're living your life in a very honest, truly, deeply humble way. There is a way in which Krishna actually becomes pleased. Just like with Kardama Muni, Vishnu was so pleased. Like Kardama Muni's prayer and humility, owning his material desire, actually satisfied the heart of Vishnu. And when Krishna becomes pleased in that way, satisfaction is a natural result. even when we have those material desires, because Krishna is pleased by the way we are dealing with them, we become satisfied. So as a sadhaka, as a practitioner of spiritual life, what I've experienced in my own life is when we learn how to own our dissatisfaction and not justify it, but be honest about it, learn how to tolerate it, and if we need to meet it, then meeting it from a place of deep honesty, that pleases Krishna. When Krishna becomes satisfied, we become satisfied. And we will experience that satisfaction because the super soul is satisfied. Okay, so I want to stop here. I don't know if there is time for a few questions. Or are we all already up there? Are we all already up there? Okay. Okay, so any questions, comments? Yes, Yashoda Dalal, very well.
Okay, so great. Would you mind just quickly going through 1 through 5 steps, 1 through 5?
Thank you. Okay, first step. When we feel dissatisfied, ask ourselves the question, why am I feeling dissatisfied? Step 1. We need to question our assumptions. So that's step 1. Why am I dissatisfied? And usually you'll find there is that material desire hiding there. This person appreciated everybody else except for me. I'm feeling dissatisfied because of that. Whose problem is that? My problem. Right? So the first thing is asking, why am I dissatisfied? Second is, if it is clearly a material need, do not fulfill it immediately or ask somebody else to fulfill it. If it is clearly a material need, do not fulfill it immediately or ask somebody else to fulfill it. Tolerate it and humbly confess to Krishna about it. Krishna, I'm feeling dissatisfied because I have this material desire. Okay. Pray for strength to go beyond it. That's step number 2. Step number 3, if it becomes louder and louder, find a Krishna conscious way to satisfy it. And by that, what I mean is, do not justify it as seva. Right. State to Krishna that this is your need and you're ashamed of it. And sincerely pray to go beyond it. Okay, that's step number 3. Step number 4 is, time and again, try to be less dependent on the material desire, on the fulfilling of the material desire. Right. And the 5th one, this is very, very important to remember. Nothing substitutes genuine spiritual advancement. Nothing substitutes genuine spiritual advancement. True satisfaction will only come when we make spiritual advancement. And that's not dependent on any material, any satisfaction of any material desire. Spiritual advancement is completely separate. So when we satisfy something materially, that is not a substitute for spiritual advancement. That may be a support to make spiritual advancement. But the only way we can be truly satisfied is by making genuine spiritual advancement. There is no substitute for it. Is that clear? Why? Okay. Yes?
One of the examples you gave is where if you're appreciated or one is not appreciated enough, feels dissatisfied. But then the other point is, why is it wrong to be felt, to have the feeling of appreciation because you're doing something for Krishna?
Right.
Obviously, that expectation is there to be appreciated.
Right.
So is it wrong to have that?
Is it wrong to have the expectation, right? We all have a natural expectation of when we do something, we want to be appreciated for it. Now the thing is, ultimately, and this is what I've seen the consciousness of people who have advanced in spiritual life. They see that my seva, in of itself, is Krishna actually giving me the opportunity. Like when I do seva and I say, okay, Krishna should actually really appreciate the seva that I'm doing. Krishna, you see how much I'm giving you. There's something there which is a little twisted. Because the opportunity for seva itself is Krishna's grace in our lives. Now, when we expect a certain amount of appreciation on top of that, right, that's not necessarily. You see, advanced souls, they don't need it. Right? So that's not spiritual. That is material. And we need it sometimes so that we can continue doing our seva. But that's not spiritual. Right. So what's important is to honestly acknowledge that, you know what, I need a little appreciation. And sure enough, that's a material desire. I need to be recognized in a certain way. But I still have it. So if I don't get it, one way of doing it, just tolerate it. If you don't get it, just tolerate it. And see what happens. You know, once my spiritual master told me, Holiness Rasanath told me, I asked him, how much should we give? And he said, give till it hurts a little bit. It was just like, he just answered it like right away. He didn't give me quantity. It was very subjective, right? Okay, to give till it hurts a little bit. You know, when you feel the pain, you're giving. It's like, my God, I've worked so hard for this. And it's like, I just have to give it away. And then nobody's even going to see this. You know, am I withholding? You know, that's where spiritual advancement is going to happen. Right? It's the same thing for material, for praise too. The advancement happens when we don't get it, and we still serve. Right? Because when we get it, it has a way of diluting it. And when we don't get it, and like we learn how to tolerate, spiritual advancement comes then. Maybe that's what Krishna wants. Make sense? Yes.
You mentioned like you should tolerate the inconvenience, right? So what's a healthy way of tolerating? You know, one is like you tolerate it by bottling it up, right? Which is going to come out at some point, right? So what is a healthy way of like tolerating things?
What is the healthy way of tolerating things? So there's a difference between tolerating it and just suppressing it. Right? So suppressing is I'm ignoring. I'm just going to distract myself from the desire. I'm just going to do something else, or I'm just going to push it to the bottom. Tolerating means learning how to live in it without satisfying it. You know what it means? It's like, you know, when you take that cold shower in the morning in winter, and like, okay, 5 minutes, I'm just going to be in it. There's nothing else you can do other than be in it. Right? It actually builds so much spiritual strength. I'm not running away. I'm not distracting. I learn how to be in it. And there is a way it loses its grip when you learn how to be in it. Right? Yes, it's around, but I'm not going to give in. That's it. That's all. That is what tolerance is. Right? There's nothing. This is the amazing thing about tolerance. Tolerance is not. There's nothing glamorous about tolerance. There's no like background music and like the hero emerging. Nothing like that. Tolerance is a very unglamorous experience. Right? And we have to accept that tolerance is an unglamorous experience. But the amazing part about tolerance is its silent strength. It deeply pleases Krishna. Nobody probably even sees it. Like other people may not even see what you're tolerating. But there's something about silent tolerance that just deeply attracts Krishna's heart. And that just means even when it's there, I'm not going to run away, I'm just going to be in it, but I'm not going to fulfill it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, Shankar.
Thank you, Rasanath, for nice class. Question I have is, you mentioned this 5 nice points to deal with the dissatisfaction, right? But isn't it that in the devotional practice or sadhana bhakti, right, that dissatisfaction is by design and not kind of something wrong? Because if dissatisfaction is not there, I mean, aren't we going to be a little complacent and be stagnant at this stage?
Absolutely. Which is why I think that's why I started the talk by saying I came to spiritual life because of dissatisfaction. Right? So dissatisfaction is a very important place. Now, in spiritual life, as we come into spiritual life, our expectation is that we become satisfied. But we don't become fully satisfied until all the material desires in the heart are gone. And even then, there is spiritual dissatisfaction. I want to serve Krishna more. And I want to give everything. I mean, Prabhupada is dissatisfied, like in a certain way. Prabhupada is so dissatisfied. Right? It was like bigger for Krishna. That's a very different experience, right? So yes, the dissatisfaction eggs us on. So what I'm saying is, I'm not saying that we have to eliminate dissatisfaction. What I'm saying is we have to convert the material dissatisfaction into spiritual dissatisfaction. And that's the goal of a sadhaka. Because when I find that material dissatisfaction inside, I know the cause of that is my material desire. And I'm going to own it. And when I confess it to Krishna and say, I don't want this, Krishna, I still have it, I just don't want this, suddenly that becomes spiritual dissatisfaction, because I'm seeing it from a spiritual perspective now. I'm seeing it from Krishna's eyes. And I'm saying, Krishna, I know you don't like this in me, and I don't want this. Right? So please take it away. That itself, that prayer itself is so pleasing to Krishna that Krishna becomes satisfied in that prayer. And then we experience the satisfaction of pleasing Krishna's heart.
So Prabhupada used to say that don't tell everything to Krishna. That's what it means.
Yes, this is again, actually, I don't think this is artificial dovetailing. This is a natural dovetailing. And what I mean by that is our material dissatisfaction is because of our spiritual dissatisfaction. We face material dissatisfaction because deep down we are experiencing absence of God. We are experiencing absence of Krishna. The Christians call it holy discontent. There is a word for it. That's what it is. But we are looking to please it in other ways. So dissatisfaction is ultimately spiritual. But we have to be able to see it. Each time it happens, we have to be able to see it that way and own it. And say, my dissatisfaction is because my lack of Krishna consciousness. Oh my God, I don't know if you have the time.
We don't want this class to end, but we have to end. But I'm just curiously quickly adding to the point that you said that this dissatisfaction and admitting it to Krishna pleases Krishna. You mentioned that last 2 times the honesty and followed by humility. I was just wondering, you don't have to answer right now. I was just wondering how honesty pleases Krishna and his devotees, and which way and how nicely and quickly Krishna melts. I mean, you don't have to answer right now.
What should I do? Should I answer it right now or should I answer it?
What is the question?
How does honesty please Krishna's heart? Should I? Okay, thank you. How does honesty please Krishna's heart? Have you had the experience yourself? You have a son. I'm going to make this very personal, as personal as I can. Okay. When kids make a mistake and they're caught, right? There are 2 ways in which they can respond. One way of responding is, I didn't do that. I don't know how it happened. Right? The other way that kids can respond is they look at you, they look at your face, they look at that, and somehow they start crying. And in that crying, there's this like, oh my God, I did this, and it displeased you. Sometimes the crying is out of fear, but sometimes the crying is out of guilt. And sometimes the crying is out of shame. And there's an expression that like, oh my God, I know I did this, I displeased you, I didn't want to do this, I'm so sorry. Now, when you see that, are you upset at the mistake or are you melted? Now, we are human beings, and that's how we respond. Now think about how Krishna will respond to that. But when it's genuine, Krishna tastes it. Krishna really knows, wow, this is sincere. And totally melts his heart. Krishna is the most forgiving. That's why we call him most merciful, right? The honesty just melts him. That's all that's necessary, really. But along with that, also, when we are honest, there is a way in which Krishna really takes away that material desire. But if we defend it and spin it and show it as something else, it doesn't work. Thank you.